In Montana, a respected retired sheriff named George Blackledge lives blissfully with his wife Margaret, his son James, and his daughter-in-law Lorna. Soon, Lorna and James welcome a baby boy, Jimmy, who brings joy to the Blackledge family and fills their home with warmth and laughter. One morning, James wakes up early and, careful not to wake anyone else, heads out to the stable to complete his morning chores. He takes the new horse out for exercise in the round pen, where he is joined by George, who proudly watches his skills. After spending a few minutes enjoying the peaceful and beautiful morning, George leads James back to the house, where they find Lorna cooking breakfast. As soon as he walks in, James lovingly greets his wife, turns on some music, and starts playing with Jimmy, who fills the house with his adorable laughter. Soon, George joins in on the games and has fun with them. After sharing a family breakfast, George heads out to the stable to do some repairs, while Jimmy takes the new horse out for a ride around their property. Later, seeing how exhausted Lorna is, Margaret advises her to rest while she offers to give Jimmy a bath and spend some time having fun with him. A few minutes later, as she proceeds to dress Jimmy, Margaret is confused to see the new horse trotting back alone, desperately hoping that he's not too late. George rushes to his son's side to check on him, and is heartbroken to learn that James had fallen off the horse, broken his neck, and died. Unable to comprehend the devastating tragedy that has suddenly befallen his family, George takes a few seconds to bid farewell to his beloved son and takes his body back to the house, where he breaks the painful news to Lorna and Margaret and organizes the funeral. Then, as Margaret watches in horror, Donnie becomes annoyed by the young boy sulking over the ice cream, aggressively tries to grab his arm, and orders him to keep walking. Hoping to comfort her terrified son, Lorna steps in and tries to calm down the shaken-up Jimmy, but Donnie lashes out at her and hits her. If he does this in public, what is he like behind closed doors? Horrified by what she sees, Margaret quietly drives back home, reflecting on everything she witnessed, starts to panic as she realizes that Lorna and Jimmy are living in an abusive home, and decides to check on their well-being the next day. The next morning, determined to disguise her concern as a surprise casual visit, Margaret goes to Lorna's home with a home-baked cake in hand, and after knocking on the door for a few minutes without getting a response, cheerfully calls out to Lorna to open the door. Moments later, having heard her vain efforts, a neighbor approaches Margaret and informs her that the wee boys had suddenly left town last night and went to live with Donnie's family. Flabbergasted by what she hears, Margaret bombards the neighbor with endless questions before understanding that Jimmy is gone for good. Now, more concerned for Jimmy's well-being than ever, Margaret drives home while trying to figure out how to proceed and decides to do whatever it takes to rescue Jimmy from growing up in such a terrible environment. Later, the couple head to the sheriff's office in town to speak to Sheriff Nevelson, who is delighted to meet George, whose incredible reputation precedes him, in person. The Blackledges explain their predicament and ask the sheriff about the Wee Boy clan. Sympathizing with them, the sheriff shares that he knows the Wee Boy clan resides in North Dakota and promises to make some calls and find more information. In the meantime, Margaret and George go out for lunch and enjoy each other's company. However, George accidentally discovers his gun hidden in the car and lashes out at Margaret for bringing it along. Margaret then apologizes, explains that she brought it for protection, thinking she was traveling alone, and calms down her husband, who secures it properly in his luggage. That evening, the sheriff informs the couple that there is a saddlery established by the Wee Boy clan in Forsyth, advises them to start their search there the next morning, offers to let them stay the night in a clean cell, and provides them with fresh sheets. Moments later, Lorna, Jimmy, and Donnie arrive at the house, which worsens the already boiling tension. Ignoring this, Margaret lovingly greets Jimmy and is heartbroken to see that the young boy has lost all his cheerful spark and turned into a trembling, scared child. Then, while Donnie scolds Lorna for coddling Jimmy too much, Margaret holds him closely, cherishing each moment she gets with him. Blanche then offers Jimmy, who's already had a burger in town, some dinner, and when he refuses, she scolds him until he thanks her for her offer. Seemingly satisfied by this and completely ignoring the Blackledges, Blanche then orders Lorna to take Jimmy to bed. Shocked by this, Margaret tries to protest and asks to spend more time with Jimmy, but Blanche stands firm. Seeing this and realizing that Blanche is toying with them and enjoying their torment, George gives Margaret a stern look which tells her to relent and put Jimmy down. Feeling defeated, Margaret does so, and as she gives the young boy a hug, seemingly emboldened by his grandparents' presence, Jimmy tells her that his burger had mustard, which he hates, and hence, he hasn't eaten much of it. Terrified by this, Lorna quickly takes Jimmy upstairs, while the heartbroken Blackledges proceed to leave. A couple of hours later, the couple meets Lorna, who, as soon as she arrives, apologizes for leaving Montana abruptly and never writing to them. Then, over lunch, the couple asks Lorna about Jimmy, suddenly beaming with pride. Lorna shares how smart her young boy is and details all his recent milestones. Moments later, Margaret boldly informs Lorna of their wish to take Jimmy back to Montana with them and promises to provide him a better future. Outraged by this, Lorna becomes defensive and lashes out at Margaret for her cruel proposal. Unfazed by this, Margaret reveals that she had seen the way Donnie treats her and Jimmy, explains that she doesn't have to live with such abuse anymore, and begs her to join them on their journey back to Montana where they can live happily like before. Straining to control her overwhelming emotions, Lorna shares her fear that if she ever tried to leave, Blanche, who will never let Donnie get away again, will kill both her and Jimmy. She then breaks down, explaining that she doesn't want Jimmy to turn out like them. Glad to hear that she wants to leave the insanity behind, Margaret offers to drive Lorna to the ranch as soon as possible so that they can get Jimmy and drive back home. However, fearing for her life, Lorna turns this down and comes up with a plan to wait until everyone goes to bed that night so that she can sneak out undetected. She promises to meet the Blackledges at 2 a.m. at their motel and warns that they must leave as soon as she gets there. A couple of hours later, the couple hears a knock on their door, and George cautiously opens the door, but gets the shock of his life as he sees Marvin and Elton on the other side. Before he can react, the brothers barge in and neutralize George, who tries to fight back. Moments later, Blanche and Bill make their way inside. Blanche then starts lashing out at Margaret, whom she believes has crossed a line by trying to come between a mother and a son. Margaret tries to explain herself, and when she fails to convince the fuming Blanche, she reveals that she was forced to get involved after seeing Donnie hit his wife and Jimmy. Seemingly annoyed by this, Blanche slaps Donnie a few times and then, to the shock of the Blackledges, orders him to slap Margaret. After hesitating for a few minutes, Donnie does as ordered and slaps Margaret. Outraged by this, George tries to free himself and come to Margaret's rescue, but he's once again neutralized and thrown to the ground. Then, as Blanche threatens the Blackledges to leave town and never look back, Bill proceeds to take advantage of Margaret, which infuriates George. Desperate to stop Bill, George pulls out his gun, holds Bill at gunpoint, and orders him to leave his wife alone. Then, George quickly steps out of the bedroom, holds Bill at gunpoint, and forces him to release Jimmy. Suddenly disturbed by the commotion, Blanche wakes up, sees what's going on, and with a gun drawn tries to confront George, who becomes distracted and loses control of the shotgun, which falls down the stairs. Then, as Bill proceeds to attack George, Blanche tries to shoot George, but accidentally shoots and kills Bill. Without even pausing to acknowledge what had just occurred, Blanche orders George to release Jimmy. Despite being held at gunpoint, George boldly defies Blanche, throws Jimmy over the balcony till Lorna catches him, and starts running out for her life. Furious, Blanche shoots George in the side of his chest. Moments later, Blanche calls out to Marvin and Elton, who come running up the stairs, and as she orders them to chase Lorna, George summons all his strength to drag himself up, attacks Blanche, and as they fight over the gun, he forces her to fatally shoot both Marvin and Elton. Margaret takes the shotgun, carefully searches for her husband around the house, and finds him gravely injured. Relieved to have gotten there just in time, Margaret rushes to George's side, helps him up, carefully takes down the stairs, and is relieved to find Peter waiting for her. Then, just as Peter and Margaret help George out of the burning house, Blanche appears out of nowhere and proceeds to shoot Margaret. Seeing this, George pushes his beloved wife out of the way, gets shot, and drops to the ground. Terrified out of her mind, Margaret reacts quickly, shoots and kills Blanche, rushes to check on George, and is devastated to learn that he succumbed to his injuries and died. Heartbroken, Margaret slumps over her husband's body and cries her eyes out until Peter drags her out of the house, which soon goes up in flames. Once outside, Margaret, Lorna, and Peter watch as the fire completely engulfs the horrifying legacy of the wee boys. Later, the trio starts their journey back, and after a few hours, Margaret thanks Peter for everything he has done for her and drops him off. Then, while shedding quiet tears, Lorna and Margaret start driving back to Montana, feeling lighter than ever for the first time in months.